Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek along with Crash like Collier. Now, Ethan is going to join us, okay, but his computer crashed. So we have Crash and a crash. Crash Collier and a computer crashing. That's how it is. A metaphor for USC season, at least in the big games of the year. But Ethan's going to join us in just a little bit. So, there's no game upcoming this Saturday. So what are we going to talk about? The offseason. We're going to talk about the transfer portal. We're going to talk about roster construction. We're going to talk about the big questions facing USC. Also, lots of coaching news from the Big Ten. And there's our graphics too. I came on here, couldn't find them, and it's a work in progress, which, again, a metaphor for USC here at the Voice of College Football. And there is Ethan Inman, a crash and a crash, the human crash and the computer crash. Again, rich in metaphors here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. So let's just get your initial reactions. And Crash, you were here first. You had the pole position. Ethan's coming in late, so I'm going to give it to you, Crash, first. Your reaction to USC's first small batch of transfer portal departures. What do you see as particularly newsworthy there?
I think probably the most newsworthy one is Brian Jackson, especially considering he was one of those preseason, like he made the preseason running back word. It was the Doak Walker, if I'm correct. But I think that one, yeah, definitely. I think it's like, damn, kind of that happened. But it really didn't surprise me. And all the other ones, too, kind of don't surprise me, given kind of the general lack of playing time a lot of them have seen. And Brian Jackson especially, sure, he was struggling with that turf toe injury for most of the year. But then also, even with putting that aside, he was still kind of behind Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders to start the year. And then after both of them go down injured, King Miller kind of takes the spotlight, in part because Jackson's still recovering. And he's just never really the same player. And given that Jordan is likely back, King Miller will be back, likely on a full ride. I have a hard time seeing Jackson getting significant carries. So I think he's kind of thinking, all right, I'm better off starting a new chapter where I can actually get meaningful playing time.
I think for me, it's got to be Braylon Conley, just because I think he played the most meaningful snaps out of all four of the guys who aren't coming back. And, he didn't play particularly well, but I think that, game reps are really valuable. And the corner position is already a position where USC kind of struggled this year. And so I think that they were going to kind of need all hands on deck in that one next year. So for me, that's kind of the one that stings just a little bit. Obviously rooting for the best for the other three guys, though.
All right. Now, Ethan wrote a long transfer portal primer at Trojans Wire. We are going to get to that in a little bit. So that's coming up. That's the feature presentation tonight. That's why we wanted to wait for Ethan to join the show. But before we get to Ethan's big primer, and I think one of the general questions, and this, we're going to apply it to USC, but this applies to all college football teams, right? There are injuries, there are youth pieces, freshmen who, had a hard time integrating into the lineup, learning the scheme, all these things. Like, this is part of every college football program every year. But now let's apply it to USC. And I think, Ethan, in light of, drilling deeper into the defense as opposed to the offense with the transfer portal and with, the way this defense needs to be remade in 2026, because to me, more of the questions are on the defensive side of the ball. Last year might have been a little bit more about the offense, but of course, the change of offensive line coaches proved to be huge, and we didn't know exactly what we were going to get from Zach Hansen. But now that we know we have a really strong offensive line coach, I think it's pretty clear the main questions in roster construction are on defense. Not that there aren't significant considerations on offense, but it's certainly weighted more toward the defense. And so there were lots of injuries in the back seven. and young guys struggling to figure it all out. And so, as we think about retention versus departures, and as we get into the transfer portal, there's just this general tension between, like, do you want to see this guy go, or do you want to see this guy stay and figure it out and develop and get better? And like, what are the odds that this guy can become the real deal, and that guy, maybe we need him to go, and then we need to go into the transfer portal to replenish, fill that spot. So Ethan, let's wrestle with these tension points. When you think about this roster, especially on defense, who are some guys that you can go in any lane or avenue, and it's going to be the same for Crash. Guys you feel really confident about, but who didn't, max out this past season, but you think like they're ready to take the next step. Guys that you're on the fence on, and guys who, nothing personal, we're just trying to win a championship here at USC. Guys who, frankly, you know what? It would be better off if they left, and Chad Bowden can buy some better groceries for 2026. Ethan, the field is yours. Take it however you want to.
Yeah, I think the two positions I'm going to focus on primarily are wide receiver and defensive line, just because I think I don't know. I think I could see it really going in any of those different ways that you just mentioned, but I think that they're the two rooms that are full of names, like full of guys who USC fans know of, full of guys who have made at least a little bit of an impact. But none of them are really superstars. I mean, once you lose Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane in the wide receiver room, because presumably both of them will be going to the NFL draft, it's like Tanook Hines and everybody else, and Zacharias Williams was supposed to be pretty good, but he was hurt for most of the year. We didn't end up getting much of an impact from Prince Strawn. You got some freshmen. DJ Jordan already transferred out. Jaden Richardson is, a guy who you could maybe see making an impact, but there's just like definitely not a lot of star power there after Mekhi and Jacoby. So I think it's really going to be important for this coaching staff. And I'm not even going to say like one way or the other, like if I believe in them, if I don't believe in them. But I think it's going to be really important for this coaching staff to take real honest stock of what they have. And if, they really believe that those players can become stars, or if they really need to go out and get new guys. And I think it's the same thing with the defensive line. I think, there's like so many guys. It just feels like the defensive line is full of guys who got like 3 sacks. Cam Crawford, Braylon Shelby, Devin Tompkins, like none of those guys are like the Aaron Donald of the Eric Henderson defensive line. So I think that it's not necessarily that, USC needs to clean house on the defensive line, because there's still a lot of talent there, like I said, and a lot of players had their moments. But I do think that like expecting one of the players that USC currently has to become one of the best defensive linemen in the country is kind of a far-fetched idea. So I think, it maybe having those honest conversations with some of those guys, like, hey, like you can stick around. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you in the rotation, but like we may need to go out and upgrade in terms of the starting lineup. And so that's kind of what I'd look for there at that position.
Well, Matt, I think kind of the areas I'm really looking at to see kind of where USC is going to really need to take a lot of focus, I think is really, I'm going to focus really on the defense, and I'm going to go linebackers, and I think the secondary. I'll start with linebackers. I think especially with Eric Gentry now out of eligibility, I think that's going to be a crucial room for USC to get right, especially if, Rob Ryan does stick around another year. I do have some concerns in that regard. I'm sure our regular listeners here, like Bob Springer in the comments, are very well aware of our criticisms of Ryan here on the Voice of College Football. But I think just with Gentry out, it's like you really are. The real question USC is going to have to solve is, and I know Chad Bowden has said, we want to major in high school recruiting and minor in the portal. And that's an easy thing to say in theory. But at the same time, especially when you have a fan base that demands national championships every single year, it kind of gets tricky to where you got to really work on that balance of, all right, do we want young talent coming in that we can develop, or do we want the quick fix with the portal. I mean, frankly, I think that's a good combo to say major in recruiting, minor in the portal. But then it gets a lot trickier when those recruits, especially those high school recruits, if they're not sensing they're going to play much in their first and definitely by their second year, don't sense they got a future, they're going to be gone. So really, it's just you got to strike that balance. And I think that's something where I'm really wanting to see, especially as we kind of see what USC's outgoing portal class looks like. And then, so especially for linebackers, then also just with the early struggles in the secondary, especially what does Kamari Ramsey do? What do some of those other guys do? Like Bishop Fitzgerald, I think he's out of eligibility. So I think I'm really wanting to see what's USC's strategy with how they find that perfect balance of how do you figure out how to make sure guys are playing enough if you bring them in early so that way they want to stick around for all 4 years or until they go pro, and versus how much getting that quick fix that possibly if you hit right on it leads to more success. And that is one thing I have been reading about is where with the transfer portals though, if you don't hit on your guys you bring in, it can really mess up your roster. And I was reading about what's going wrong with Colorado, and it seems like they've really been, because of how heavily Deion Sanders relies on the portal, when they miss on their targets, like things go bad really quickly, as we saw with the Buffaloes this year.
Well, and this brings up a familiar tension point, and it's kind of now the new normal in college football. That of course you want to have homegrown talent, and of course you want to have depth that you build and cultivate within your program. But it shouldn't be lost on anyone that USC's best year under Lincoln Riley, year one, was fueled by transfer portal players. Jordan Addison, Travis Dye, of course Caleb Williams, also Bobby Haskins from Virginia along the offensive line. I mean, USC nailed the portal pickups, the portal additions in 2022. And it has not had nearly the same hit rate, certainly at the high leverage positions since then. And players that USC really could have used. Good example, Derek Harmon. That was a really big talking point a couple years ago. But Oregon got him, and Harmon was excellent for the Ducks, led them to a 13-0 regular season Big Ten championship. So, a lot of ping pong balls in the air here. But Ethan and Crash, your sense of where USC needs to make the most important transfer portal investments, and like not only the positions, but like you can't lose this guy, or you can't let Oregon get him, or something of that nature. And then you balance that with the knowledge that you have the elite recruiting class coming in. Like, how does that elite recruiting class alter the way Chad Bowden approaches the portal? I mean, it seems to me that, okay, you have an elite but very young set of players coming in. Like that, to me, having the big recruiting class seems to me, and this might be a paradox to some, but it heightens the need to get an excellent veteran portal guy at the premium position, because if you have the depth pieces that you're going to develop, and you're not expecting them to be finished products next season, but like by October, early November, you hope that they will have developed. But you absolutely need that veteran presence for a big September road game. And the Big Ten schedule is going to be released later this month. We'll find out exactly how the schedule lines up. But to me, having the elite recruiting class doesn't reduce the need for the portal. To me, it actually increases the need for it to get a fully proven, fully coached up, fully ready guy who you don't need to go to square one with. You have someone who's ready from day one, kind of like the presidency of the United States, right? How do you think that the unique calculus changes due to the elite recruiting class and the belief that, just one more recruiting cycle and then it could really all come together? But the transfer portal is that very crucial piece where you need veteran guys who can piece together the roster and help you be strong in September. Ethan, then Crash.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this earlier and I was writing the transfer portal primer for Trojans Wire, I really thought about positions of leadership first and foremost, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like I think, linebacker, you're really going to miss Eric Gentry. And Rob Ryan isn't really cutting it from a coaching position. So if he's going to be around, or if you have a new coach who, you're trying to have in their first season, trying to figure all this stuff out, like it would be really valuable for USC to have just kind of a guy who has a lot of football under his belt, knows, has kind of been around the block, knows how to play the college game, knows how to lead younger players. I think that would be really key because, the linebacker is obviously like the quarterback of the defense. And we saw this year a lot of times where Desmond Stevens and Jaden Walker, who are very physically talented players, looked kind of lost on the field. It's nothing against them personally. I think I would feel a lot more confident about that room if the Trojans went out and got a kind of a more proven guy to lead it. Defensive line is similar. We've talked about that a little bit. I think also at corner, I wrote about that in my article. You have basically all your veterans leaving because all the veterans are like redshirt seniors. So you've got like DeCarlos Nicholson and DJ Harvey, like for sure gone. And then we'll see what happens with Prophet Brown. We'll see what happens with Kamari Ramsey. They could bring Prophet Brown back because of like a medical red shirt. But even if you have Brown and Ramsey back, that's sure a lot of youth behind them. And then you just had one of your young players that you played this year leave. And I think out of all of the positions that USC has recruited well in the 2026 recruiting class, I don't believe corner is one of like their top 5 or 6. And just the secondary in general. So I think, they really could have used a veteran this year, and I don't want to see them like having seen that go into next season saying, we'll be fine. We'll make our own veterans. Like, we didn't do it this year. So
I think for me, an area USC is going to need to focus on, and I'm not too worried. Well, I'm not worried about the coaching side, but I'm still definitely concerned about what it could look like is USC's offensive line, especially if Jade Mayava departs USC and Hassan Longstreet is starting under center. You're going to need whoever it is, especially Longstreet, protected. So even though he wasn't exactly ended up losing the starting job, I did like how USC brought in JaAndre Reed to then to compete to come in and compete for that starting center job, because then it forces everyone else to be better. It forced Killian O'Connor, who was the huge underdog in that position battle, to really have to go out to prove himself that he was the more consistent option and deserved the right to start. So I'm really thinking USC's O-line is going to really need to be solid, especially if there are a few departing pieces. And I mean, Reed will be gone. I think O'Connor's got one more year if you want. O'Connor's got one more year, but still, I think you want a veteran guy in there, even if he doesn't necessarily win the job, who has experience playing on the O-line and can then push the other guys to be better, especially because of how I think just Reed did. I think he pushed O'Connor to be better. And I think that just motivation helps everyone in that room. So I really would like someone, especially on the O-line, who's a veteran, who then can push the other guys to be better, but then also bring that leadership and experience that I think helped USC's O-line this offseason or this past season.
All right, let's now go to Ethan's transfer portal primer. Ethan, I'm popping up on the screen the wide receiver positions. There are other positions above that, like quarterback, and where you don't anticipate USC making additions, but wide receiver was the first position on your list where you think USC will and should make additions. So walk us through your transfer portal primer for the coming off season.
Yeah, so we'll start with wide receiver. Quarterback, like you said, I don't really anticipate them doing anything crazy, unless barring something disastrous like both of the top 2 quarterbacks leaving, but that's not going to happen. And then running back, I think I said similarly, like there's just a ton of depth. Like I don't really see any. Maybe they add a depth piece but I don't really see them adding a starter with Wayman Jordan more than likely coming back, and then probably getting King Miller back as well. But wide receiver, they should definitely make an addition. And kind of like I talked about earlier, I think the question has to do with do they feel like they have a wide receiver 1, 2, and 3, or at least a wide receiver 1 and 2, and this is just adding like receivers 3 through 5. I think I made a typo there and mistakenly said Jaden Richardson is a young player. He's actually a redshirt senior, which Bob Springer caught me on earlier in the chat. But I think I was thinking of Corey Sims. DJ Jordan is obviously transferring out. So I asked some questions like, will Zacharias Williams be back? How will he do? Will Prince Strachan be back? Like, there's just so many question marks. And so I think, with as many question marks as there are, even though like there's a ton of talent, like there's going to be a lot of great freshmen, there's a lot of solid returners. I think that, you want to have at least one guy that, you're not really wondering about there in that room. And then, I kind of went on tight end. I don't really think they make any additions. I think you got a solid duo there with Lake McCree, or not Lake McCree. Sorry. Lake McCree's leaving, with Walker Lyons and Mark Bowman. Mark Bowman, like we've talked about a lot on the show, back when he was recruited, is kind of talked about as like a generational talent at tight end. So he should, be a guy who's used especially very extensively in the passing game, because that's kind of a scouting report. And they also have Josiah Jefferson coming in from JUCO. So I anticipate that room being great. And then offensive line, I think, it's kind of, for me, it's just kind of in Zach Hanson we trust. I think everybody still has eligibility. I think it's about retention. Like, you want Elijah Page to come back. You want, Kaylon Miller and Tobias Raymond and all those guys to come back. John Ray Reed is like the only guy who's like for sure out of eligibility. So I think that, it's more about getting those guys to stay, and also, bringing some of the new guys in from the transfer portal. And at that point, it's in Zach Hanson we trust. Defensive line, I think that they definitely got to get some veteran pieces, and I think what they really need a star, to be honest, because it's kind of like I said earlier. There's a lot of like guys who look like solid rotational players, but none of them really were consistent stars, consistent game wreckers. It was very much a defensive line by committee. So I would like to see them get, a guy who they can rely on, or at least develop one. And then the secondary, I think I was pretty adamant that USC get some pieces, especially some veteran pieces there. I kind of like the safety duo of Kennedy Urlacher and Christian Pierce, if that's who they have. Corner, I don't really feel confident at all. Kamari Ramsey, I put in both categories as someone who could stay or could leave for the draft just because he played nickel this year, even though he's a normal safety. So I don't think USC is going to get Kamari Ramsey to stay, or at least he'd be silly to if they told him that he's going to have to play nickel all year next year. But that would truly be an interesting outcome if that's the case. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what Prophet Brown decides. And then I think, I talked about special teams a little bit. USC is going to have to get a punter in all likelihood, because Sam Johnson is out of eligibility. So, and Ryan Sayuri is their current backup punter. So unless you want Sayuri to start punting and kicking and be like the Shohei Ohtani of the special teams, or, do something insanely crazy, like move him to punter and keep Caden Chittenden and make him the kicker, which would just be insane, ridiculous. You probably are going to have to go out and get a punter as well. So yeah, that's kind of the whole gist of it there.
Yeah, I certainly think Ethan.
So, ran through a lot of different situations. Oh, yeah, Crash. I mean, you can comment on Ethan's primer, but I just wanted to mention kind of the larger point that, with all these moving pieces, all these moving parts and all these question marks, questions come come up. Lots of questions. And I guess, is there kind of a tentpole player at any position group where, you think like this guy can hold everything down, or this guy can provide stability for the unit? Crash, I'll let you take a crack at that one. But, Ethan, you wrote this primer. Just, when you wrote this, when you researched it, when you went through the depth chart and you weighed these considerations, which players were kind of like the tentpole players that USC really needs to make sure to both retain and develop, so that each position group has fewer question marks going into opening day of next season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think offensive line is what I mentioned in the article the most, as just, there's a lot of talent there. I think that, there's a lot, and it's a lot of like sophomores and juniors. So it's really shaping up to be a unit, that has a lot of experience that could go in next year and really be skull crushers. Also the offensive line, like camaraderie and consistency, and just kind of togetherness, chemistry is really important. It's one of the most important out of any of the positions on the field, because they work directly next to each other all the time. So I think that is, a really key position where I would certainly want to see them recruit, do really well at retaining their players. And then I think like I've harped on really wanting them to get Walker Lyons to stay, even though I do think Mark Bowman's going to be really good. I think, in the past I said it was a concern for me because Ryder Lyons is going to BYU. I believe Ryder Lyons has another year before he actually attends BYU, because he has to do his mission first. So I think that, Walker Lyons leaving now really wouldn't make any sense, but I do, USC can't just like assume he's going to stay. They still have to put in some effort to keep him. Jakeem Stewart for sure. I don't really see any reason why Jakeem Stewart would leave, but I think, him being the youngest contributor on that defensive line who could be a home wrecker at times, I think he's the most likely to actually develop into a star by the end of his career. So he's someone who I'd really want to have them keep. I really want to see them keep Zacharias Williams, just because I heard such great things about him. And, he was injured for most of the year, so we never really got to see what he could do. That's a great point from Bob. I mean, Kennedy Urlacher was a really fun player to watch, but he's obviously undersized and lacks some of the physical attributes that you'd like to see from a traditional safety. So, but just getting him on the field would obviously be great. Yeah, those are kind of the ones that come to mind for me.
All right, Crash, your view of Ethan's very expansive transfer portal primer.
Well, I think there's a lot there. Obviously, Ethan, is always it's always great reading your work, especially, when you just break it down too. Not just when I get to read it beforehand, but also just hearing you kind of analyze your own work. So I always enjoy that. So it helps you definitely really process it, and then also just give you more thoughts on it than you initially had from when you read it. But I think really there's a lot, obviously, in each position group, and just you're asked about is there kind of a guy at each position that's holding it down? I'm not sure I see that exactly, just given kind of where USC is. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just wondering could USC though could any position groups be enhanced by, I guess, having a veteran leader, an experienced guy in there who knows the drill, who's either played a lot, or whether that's at the lower levels, or has just had a lot of experience winning even at a Power 4 program. Do you try to get him in the building, not just so that way he can help bring experience? So I'm not sure exactly if there's any exact guys who are holding any position group down, but I definitely think any position group could be enhanced by having one of those such guys.
All right. So we've talked a lot about the transfer portal, and of course that's going to be an evolving drama as we go along in the month of December and on into January. But now let's deal with the other really big piece for USC, and that is the coaching staff needing to really ramp it up, to take the young guys both the incoming freshmen and the freshmen turned sophomores. And like this developmental curve needs to really begin to swing up. And this was a very slow developmental curve, particularly on defense this season. And like the rate of development, the rate of progress just needs to be faster. You know, younger guys really took a long time getting settled in. And like in late October, early November, you know, we saw some consistency with guys coming out of halftime. You know, it still wasn't at the start of games, but like there was consistency of at halftime, third quarter, guys were beginning to be sponges. They were beginning to apply what Danton Lynn was telling them. And, you know, Danton said right around the beginning of November, like it's been a journey. It's been a journey. It's been a tough slog with these young players in terms of making sure that concepts get retained and absorbed to where, you know, as an athlete, you're not thinking, you're just naturally applying what you learn in practice on the field, and it just translates to game day. And that Danton Lynn was very candid and open about saying it was a slow process. So this year it needs to be a faster process. And maybe, you know, it might not happen all at once, but certainly the rate of learning and application needs to speed up for, you know, for the second year guys. For the freshmen, you know, that's I think a slightly different question. But the question I have for you guys, Ethan and then Crash, is let's do some power rankings, okay? Power rank the assistants in terms of like your confidence in their ability to improve as developers. I think we'd all agree what number one is. So let's just put it this way: after Zach Hansen, let's rate, take the temperature of the room here, your confidence level in the various main position coaches on staff, not counting Trumaine Carroll, because strength coach is kind of like the umbrella of everything. But the non-Zach Hansen position coaches, take me through your levels of confidence in each of them. Ethan, then Crash.
Yeah, I think, you know, a name that doesn't get brought up that much in USC circles that I think did a really great job this year and has a lot of my confidence is USC's running back coach, Anthony Jones Jr. Like King Miller coming in and being able to be as good as he was really is a testament to what Anthony Jones Jr. was able to do with that room. And obviously, you know, there was no running back that came in for USC that really missed a beat that got, you know, more than like 5 or 6 touches on the season. So for them to be 4 deep like they were and play as well as they did, I think he's probably like, you know, under Zach Hansen, the guy I'm the most confident in. I think after that, you know, it's going to be surprising based on how the season started, but I think probably Doug Belk, just because I think, you know, Doug Belk did the most with the least. I think that, you know, USC's biggest injuries were all in the secondary. And once those players did go down, they had players who just had never seen a college football field before. And they figured out how to stand up in some big games and help USC win those games. And you know, Nebraska is one of them that comes to mind. They were a lot better in the second half against Iowa, obviously. So I think, you know, he's certainly up there. Chad Savage also, obviously. Tight end room was fantastic. You know, I think that Lake McCree and Walker Lyons are one of the best tight end duos in college football. So he deserves to be up there as well. I think it's, you know, Eric Henderson is honestly near the bottom, just because I think it feels like the USC defensive line performance kind of went like this. Like, I think, you know, we maybe just overreacted a little bit to, you know, USC playing a couple of cupcake games early in the season because the defensive line looked really good. And then kind of post Michigan State, USC played Illinois and got only 1 sack, and it was, I believe, on a corner blitz by DeCarlos Nicholson. And that was the only sack of the entire game. And then I believe after that, like it never really felt like the defensive line was the same again. So, weren't really getting home on the quarterback, weren't really getting home on, the running backs. And hey, it's not horrible. Like we didn't have a UCLA horrible defensive line. UCLA's defensive line was god awful. Goodness gracious. If you want to laugh at some stat lines, go look at the sack and tackle for loss numbers that UCLA put up this year. But I still just don't think that I saw much improvement. And so I'd really hope to see more improvement from him next year. And then obviously Rob Ryan's at the bottom. And I don't think I really need to go into why. But I think that we've litigated that a lot on this podcast. So, but I'm an optimistic person. I have hope for people. I believe that people can change. So, maybe he can change, and I will certainly be happy for him if he does. But I do think that it's the longest shot, probably.
Yeah, so I think I'll just start at the bottom, at least with kind of the obvious ones. Rob Ryan and Ryan Dutery, I think, are kind of at the bottom, given that just kind of what has happened in their rooms under their watch this season. So no, I think we have, like you said, Ethan, I think we've litigated those ones enough. So won't go too much into depth there. I think guy at the top of my list for me after Zach Hansen I got to give a lot of credit to Chad Savage, but he's been able to come in and just have Lake McCree and Walker Lyons not just both playing well, but also being really encouraging of each other to be successful. Like you could easily see that where even if you could just possibly show where maybe, there could be some jealousy between them if one's having a better game and gets more targets, gets more receptions than the other. But that does not appear to be the case with McCree or Lyons this year. So really a lot of credit to Savage for how he just developed those guys. I think also Dude was impressed with Dennis Simmons too, and just how he was able to turn Tanuk Hines into that alternate third option this year. So I think he's kind of near the top of my list too, the wide receivers coach, especially just if there was a game where Mekhi Lemon or Jacoby Lane struggled. Hines was both a good option then to be the go-to guy, or also just that third option when both Lemon and Lane were heavily guarded, which is often a lot of the cause. And I think obviously defensive line, like you said, Ethan, or I'll keep it on offense because I've been more impressed there. I think Luke Heward, I think he did a good job. I mean, surprised he was the one who got the nomination on, not that he did a bad job, but I was surprised he was the coach on the USC staff nominated for the Broyles Award, especially given, the job Zach Hansen's done. And I think Zach Hansen, of all the assistant coaches, did the best job this year at USC. So it was very surprising that Hansen didn't get a nod to be a finalist for the Broyles Award this year. So wanted to point that out. And then I think, kind of like then I think also, let's see. Then I think, like you said, Anthony Jones Jr. doing a great job with the running backs, especially when both Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders went out, getting King Miller to be pretty effective in most games. And as for the defensive coaches, I think kind of like you said, defensive line, defensive ends started good, but then kind of went a little downhill. Linebackers we already discussed. And then Trevon Reed, I mean, I think it sounds like I've heard some of his interviews before. I know he talks a good game, but I think the quarterbacks room got better throughout the year, but it was definitely like that whole secondary, like we said, has struggled at times. So really just, hopefully and then Doug Belk too, just with overseeing the whole secondary. I think there was definitely those two guys. I think they had some struggles at start, but kind of pulled it together, but still kind of some definitely at times questionable moves, especially with Kamari Ramsey at nickel. So those are kind of my thoughts overall and kind of how I'd sort of roughly power rank all the coaches on the staff.
I'll just try and add a few things here. I wouldn't say Dennis Simmons is doing a bad job as wide receiver coach, but I think it's worth noting, Dorian Singer, when he came in as an elite portal piece, he did not get developed. And there has been a track record of USC has one or two stars, but then do the depth pieces in the wide receiver room get developed? Year one of Lincoln Riley was the best year for USC's receivers as a whole. Not only because you had Jordan Addison And not only because you had Mario Williams at the top, but you had Taj Washington, you had Kyle Ford, you really had Brendan Rice came along. You really had a lot of different guys contributing. Like there were 5, I'm going to make people hungry. There were 5 guys in that wide receiver room who were threats. And like we saw them against Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. You know, Brendan Rice had a huge game. And a lot of USC fans, if you go back 3 years, people were angry at Brendan Rice. They thought, bust in the middle of the season, but he stuck with it. And in November and then on into the Cotton Bowl game. And of course, Taj Washington, Mr. Reliable, but as a 3rd or 4th option, that was USC's best year. I'm challenging Dennis Simmons to get back to the 2022 standard. So, Mekhi Lemon has had a Biletnikoff worthy year. So you can't say Dennis Simmons has done a bad job, but I do think it's important for USC to have 5 guys, with or without Fries, 5 guys in that receiver room who are all significant threats, contributors. You had that in 2022. You really haven't had it since then, because some portal options haven't panned out, and the depth pieces, below, Tanook Hines is a success story, but below that, I think I need more from my wide receivers coach in a Lincoln Riley offense. So if there's one guy on the offensive side of the ball I'm really expecting more from, it is Dennis Simmons. As for the defense, I'm just going to say this. Should we all be panicking that Rob Ryan hasn't been fired at this point? Like, is it time to ring the alarm bell here? Ethan, Crash, any thoughts on that? Or you're not worried just yet?
Well, Matt, I think that just considering like how much we've been, just talking about Rob Ryan on this show and not exactly, considering how many times I've imitated him on this show, I think our stance here on the USC channel, the voice of college football, is very clear on what Rob Ryan's future should be with USC. He should not have a future. He should be packing his bags. He should be getting a box. He should be clearing out his office right now. I'm just going to say that right now. So I think that, I think he was definitely, like I've said, he was interesting, funny to listen to. Oh, yeah, Eric Gentry, right? I think that even still, he just didn't live up to the hype of those press conferences, of those interviews. The hype didn't turn into consistency on the field. It didn't turn into what we needed to see from the linebackers room. So I don't know if he'll get let go. I mean, Lincoln Riley has shown a loyalty that I think sometimes is a little too dangerous at times. I mean, we saw this best with Alex Grinch, and I'll even admit at the time I was like fine with giving Grinch a chance, even though looking at it now, I know I was very wrong to support him on that. But still, I think just after what we've seen from Ryan this year, he needs to go. And I'm wondering, after some of those last games, I'm just wondering he shouldn't have been coaching past like the end of the season. So I think USC needs to look at upgrading the position there.
Yeah, I think it's a little concerning. I think, it's not necessarily a typical move to make a massive deal out of a position coach firing like right after the season. So maybe it's just that, they're not wanting to be insulting there. But I will say, like, based on everything I've read about, how Rob Ryan feels about USC, like he's not going to leave on his own terms. Like it almost sounded like I read an ESPN article, that came out about him and how he ended up at USC. And because, it's pretty unconventional for someone like Rob Ryan to be hired as a position coach at a university after the career he's had. And it seemed like he was thinking he was going to be there forever if they'd keep him. So he's not going to leave. So, someone else is going to have to show him the door. And so it'll be interesting to see if, USC is willing to do that. I want to get on a little bit on Simmons, just because I think based on what I've heard from Lincoln Riley and the staff, and just generally the way that the receiver development has shifted in the program in the past few years, I think that having a really top heavy room was actually intentional, because I think that, they realized last year, like, you had Deuce Robinson also in town, you had Zachariah Branch, then you had Lemon and Lane. It sounds like the staff kind of made the decision that, like, all right, like, we're going to have too many cooks in the kitchen if we keep all four of these guys. So we're just going to kind of like try to keep the two best, who we believe are the two best, Lemon and Lane. And then, kind of tell that Zachariah and Deuce Robinson that the writing's on the wall. And then, and then that'll, so be it, basically. I don't know if it's the right choice. Like, I think especially about having Lemon, Lane, and Deuce Robinson all in the same wide receiver room. I think that would have been just unbelievably cool. And so, my heart hurts a little bit that we didn't get to see that. But I do think that move was a somewhat staff-wide intentional move to not make the room less deep, but like maybe really focus development and game plan and just emphasis in general on a couple of key receivers that USC thought was going to be stars. And it paid off in the sense that Lemon and Lane were stars, but I do really get what you're saying there in the sense that, like, it's kind of frustrating from a depth perspective, and frustrating when now those two guys are headed to the NFL and you're kind of like, who's going to step up and replace them?
Matt, I'd like to add to that. I think it's certain on to what Ethan said here about, I think there's certainly a balance you got to strike where, and I'm not saying depth isn't back. I mean, we saw how it benefited USC when Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders went down in the running back room. But if you have too many guys who can ball out, does that crowd it up? And then, like we saw last year, yeah, you had Lemon and Lane, then you had Deuce Robinson and Zachariah Branch. But what's going to happen if you have too many guys who think they're not going to get cut, who think they aren't going to get the receptions and targets they think they deserve? You're going to see attrition in those positions. So it's a really careful balance of how do you make it so that we have like go-to options, but also not make guys want to leave. So in that case, if that's your strategy, what I really want to see from Dennis Simmons this offseason is I really want to see key development of just obviously Tanu Kynes, because he's going to have to step up, assuming both Lemon and Lane are gone. But then also just of those other guys that you're bringing in just via recruiting, via the portal, do you go out and get someone there? So really, I think it's just Dennis Simmons' big job is, how do you find, if you're going to try to go with this model of have two go-to guys and a couple of guys who can kind of go in here and there and be that alternate third option, you better be damn good at developing. So that's really what I want to see from Dennis Simmons this offseason.
It's really interesting how this conversation, this show has taken an interesting turn. Like, I did not expect to be talking about wide receivers this much, but like this is a really not just interesting but important point. And I'm getting mad too, because just imagine if Jaden Mayava had Lane, Lemon, Deuce, and Branch in the room. But no, it was Miller Moss. And it's this really irritating thing at USC under Lincoln Riley where everything is just right in some areas, in some seasons, but the other pieces aren't right in those same seasons. And if we could combine them in a different way, we'd be cooking. Whether it's five guys or, you pick your favorite, in and out, your favorite burger. But, the pieces are partly matched, but they can't get the full Rubik's Cube aligned. Last year, the way the defense played was good enough to win with this year's offense, right? If you have the 2025 offense and the 2024 defense, you have a playoff team. But one part of it was last year, one part of it was this year. And so this year you have Jaden Mayava, but you didn't have Deuce Robinson and Zachariah Branch joining Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane. And, last year with Zachariah Branch, it seemed as though route running was a real problem for him. It seemed as though he wasn't fully grasping that offense. But maybe it was Miller Moss being a little gun shy, Miller Moss, just trying to analyze it as it is, call it for what it is. He did not trust his receivers to make contested catches. He wanted to make the percentage throw, but that meant he would hold on to the ball in the pocket. Jaden Maiava lets it rip. He doesn't think as much, and I mean that in a good way, because your throws, your reactions need to be instinctive. And so Zachariah Branch's struggles might have had something to do with the way Miller Moss played quarterback position, which we all can see and recognize was not the natural fit for Lincoln Riley's offense. I know we were all thrilled after the LSU game last season and hopeful for what could happen. And Miller Moss did play really well against Penn State, but it wasn't consistent. It wasn't a week-to-week thing. And so it's just that really frustrating reality at USC where items that you had in 2024, if you could combine them with 2025 in specific ways, you'd have a complete team or something close to it. But no, you had pieces of 24, pieces of 25 that weren't able to be matched together at the same time, and you're having USC falling short of the playoff goal, the playoff standard. And so, Dennis Simmons, to get back to Dennis Simmons, his failure to maximize Zachariah Branch. Deuce Robinson developed. Deuce Robinson came along. You could kind of see him late in 2024 becoming a fully realized product. But Zachariah Branch just never caught on, and yet here he is under Kirby Smart, who is not an offense-first coach. And yet Zachariah Branch has had a really good, confident season at Georgia. He's playing in the SEC championship game. He's playing in the college football playoff. So that only adds to my sense of, Dennis Simmons, he's leaving something on the table, and he needs to max out a lot more at USC. All right, we have more of our show to come tonight, but first, a word from our sponsors. We'll see you in a minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And you can catch Mark Rogers' show and his national show here at the Voice of College Football 6 nights a week, Mondays through Saturdays, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in LA and the rest of the West. That's here at the Voice of College Football. Now, how can you support the USC channel as we go into the offseason? We prepare for the bowl game and a very big transfer portal. Well, let's go to the USC homepage at the Voice of College Football, and you go down here to the video section. You just scroll down on our homepage, and you see that item on the right side, bonus. So that's a bonus cut. We did a half-hour interview with former USC quarterback and current football analyst Cody Kessler. So you have a 17-minute bonus cut. That's for our members. So Jeff Rodriguez, other members get exclusive insider access to that. So tell your friends, if you are a member, you get 17 bonus minutes of Cody Kessler if you join at the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier on the channel. You click the join button, you get that pop-up. There you go, Heisman 8, national champions 11. You join at those two tiers, you get that bonus cut with Cody Kessler. But now let's go back down to that video row. So you have the 17-minute bonus cut, but we also gave you 15 free minutes, so 15 and a half free minutes. Cody Kessler talks about his USC career. That's free for everyone. Everyone can watch that, but you get that 17-minute bonus cut, Cody Kessler on the college football landscape. That is the exclusive insider video for our members. So that is what helps the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Also, Ethan wearing that USC VOCFB camo cap. Go to vocfb.com/shop. Any USC branded VOCFB product proceeds go to help the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. All right, so as we wind down our show, final segment, the big news from Westwood. The Bruins land the plane. They bring in Bob Chesney, and, you know, this is a very simple math equation. Curt Cignetti's from James Madison. Bob Chesney's from James Madison. I think I know what UCLA wants to do. Ethan, you wrote about this at Trojans Wire. Go into the thought process and kind of the tension points created by UCLA's big coaching hire.
Yeah, what I wrote at Trojans Wire is basically that this hire is pretty low risk, high reward for UCLA. And I think as a result, it's going to create a really frustrating dynamic for USC fans if Bob Chesney does well. Because obviously when USC invested as much money as they did in Lincoln Riley, it was because they thought that they were getting a known commodity, right? They were getting a guy who made 3 CFPs in the era of the 4-team CFP. And now we're 4 years in and we can't even make the 12-team CFP. So I think that, you know, the just general dynamic of having a coach now across town who is not a guy who they're going to pay, you know, 9 figures to come to town, certainly. But is a guy who has won a lot and, you know, that a lot of people were excited about. Like the UCLA program is in such a funny state at the moment. You know, with the school potentially leaving the Rose Bowl, with the, you know, just general laughingstockness of this past season under, especially when it was under Deshaun Foster. And then, you know, they kind of brought it up a little bit under Tim Skipper, and then they kind of fell off the face of the earth again. So like, it definitely is a program that's brand value is at a pretty low point in its history, to be honest with you. But sometimes that can create the best possible situation for a coach like Bob Chesney. He gets to go in with pretty little pressure. But, you know, if he succeeds, it'll be one of the best stories, you know, from an objective point of view in college football. It won't be one of the best stories for USC fans, though, because they'll ultimately be on, you know, the kind of suffering end of this one.
I think it's a really smart hire for UCLA, especially you said, I mean, you're getting them on the cheap. I mean, I know that was kind of like what people are saying, oh, it's the upside of Deshaun Foster. You can learn on the job. But the difference is with Deshaun Foster and Bob Chesney has proven himself at the lower levels, much like Curt Cignetti did. So it's like, if he can basically do if Chesney can do what Cignetti did, especially when, and I mean, even for Indiana, it was kind of even worse because they had virtually no history. At least UCLA had some. They have a national championship to their name. Whether or not USC fans actually recognize its legitimacy is another discussion, given that it is shared with Ohio State. But I did want to, but at least UCLA's got history. But like you said, Ethan, they are at a low point, and they're turning to a guy who has consistently proven himself at every level, like starting in D2, then worked his way up or even D3, I think, then worked his way D2, FCS, and then finally had some good years, 2 really great years, and has James Madison positioned to possibly make the CFP if Duke somehow wins the ACC over Virginia. So I really just think like it's a smart hire. And you know what, if he does well, then it's like what we kind of talked about. Then you reward him. Then you give him the massive contract that you saw Indiana give Curt Cignetti. You reward him once you see the results. You don't just upfront the money and then, you know, realize it's a disaster in a few years. And then you're like, oh, shoot, we got to pay this guy $50 million.
Cough, Nebraska, cough.
Yeah, so I think it's a really smart hire. So a lot of credit to UCLA. And I was honestly like not sure how this would go, given just Martin Jarman hiring a committee to try to help him, and then also just, even though it does make it more of a bulletproof hire. Like I think it was Bill Moos when he was at Washington State, and people asked, "Oh, are you getting a committee?" And Moos was like, "You're looking at the committee. It's me." So while it was definitely, I think Jarman should have definitely maybe, I don't exactly agree with how they got to Chesney. I think it's a really smart hire.
Yeah, and now we begin to find out what kind of NIL operation UCLA has, what kind of muscle they can provide to support Bob Chesney, and of course Bob Chesney's coordinator hires, and also will there be a Signetti-style James Madison portal exodus to Westwood, much as what happened with Signetti in Indiana, bringing a lot of JMU players along. I think you'd expect that to some degree. But, can Bob Chesney replicate the Signetti formula in Westwood? USC fans obviously hoping that won't happen. All right, folks. So it's been an hour, and there's no game upcoming next Saturday, so no more Sunday shows. But we're back at you next Tuesday, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles. And again, 15 free minutes of Cody Kessler, 17 minutes for the bonus cut. Please consider joining as a member at the middle Heisman or top national champion tier. And right after we finish this show, 3 of us are going to do a bonus cut on the coaching carousel. So you want to look for that here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. So for Ethan Inman, and by the way, Ethan, glad you're feeling better. We missed you on Sunday. And Crash Like Collier, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Tuesday as we head into a very long but very important offseason at USC. Fight on, everybody. See you next Tuesday here on the USC channel